actually add things to a list. So how about instead of just having a string on state, let's put an array. So instead of acrobat name, I'll have acrobats. I'll initialize it to an empty array. And then instead of just setting some variable to exactly what I typed in there, I want to push that onto an array. So we want to push it onto the array that's already there, right? So we need to get the array that's already in this.state.acrobats. So const acrobats, and I could set that to this.state.acrobats. But we don't want to actually do that. We want a copy of the array. We don't want to modify it directly in state, because we learned yesterday that objects, including arrays, are always passed around by reference. So if we push it onto this variable acrobats, this line is not creating a new copy of this.state.acrobats. It's just creating a new reference to it, to the exact same thing. So we need to copy this.state.acrobats. How the heck do we do that? Used to be a real pain in the neck. ES6 gives us a new syntax that makes it really easy to copy an array. Let's Google that. ES6 array copy. The third one looks good. Spread syntax. The spread syntax allows an expression to be expanded in places where multiple arguments, or multiple elements, or multiple variables are expected. What? What that means is, and here's the syntax, it's just an ellipsis in front of the array. It'll break it apart into its pieces. And you could use that to say, break apart an array into arguments that you want to pass to a function. Because if it expects 3 arguments, you can't just pass in an array with 3 objects, right? But using spread syntax, you could transform that array into the 3 separate things. Similarly, if we just separate that inside an array literal, we can do the same thing. Here's what I mean. So acrobats here should be an array. And what's going to be in that array? Well, how about we just break apart this.state.acrobats into its different objects and just put them all inside there. Spread syntax this.state.acrobats. And that's exactly what that does. Spread this.state.acrobats breaks that array into its pieces. And I'm doing that inside this array literal, which effectively makes a copy. Now, if why that works just blows your mind a little too much, just remember, easy way to make a copy of an array. Just don't forget the square brackets around it. So we're making a copy of this.state.acrobats. And then we can just say acrobats.push this acrobat name input value, or unshift if you like. I know we're a big fan of unshift these days. And then this .set state, not acrobat name anymore, right? What do I need to put in there? It's this .state acrobats that I'm replacing, and I'm replacing it with this new variable acrobats, this new array. What do I put in there? Acrobats. That works. It's the same thing as this, right? The key is called acrobats. And the value is the variable acrobats. And using the new shorter syntax in ES6, we can just write it like that. So what does that mean down here in our JSX? Never mind this paragraph. Let's put a UL. Notice, by the way, I didn't have to put an ID or a class or anything on this P because I never had to use query selector to grab it. I just right inside the paragraph told it what piece of data I'm binding it to. Much simpler, especially as things get complicated. And they're about to get a little complicated. So let's create a UL. And then inside there, What do I want to do in English? I want to have an li for every item in that array, this.state.acrobats, right? So for every item in the array, this.state.acrobats, I want to put out an li. So for every item in the array, I want to do the same thing. What do we do when we want to do the same thing to every item in an array? Map. So again, some curly braces so we can put a JavaScript expression in here. And let's just say this.state.acrobats.map. Map takes a function, right? So we'll make a little arrow function here. So map will receive as its first argument each item from the array, right? This is just going to be an array of acrobats. Acrobat. So what should this function do? I should put an li in there, right? We're in JSX world. What if I just say return li and just put the acrobat in there? Seem legit? So my arrow function here just returns an li with the acrobat in it. And it calls that for every single thing in the array. Too good to be true? Let's try. Kyle. There it is. Mateen. There it is. Andrew. Whoop. There it be. Seth. It's working. So there is quite a bit of boilerplate we have to work out just to get React working at all. But that last part was actually super easy. Think about it. Our event handler is this long. And it added it to an array, and it updated the DOM. It created a whole new li and stuck it in there. But nowhere in here do we have to use query selector to get the UL. No longer do we have, nowhere do we say create element li or clone one that's already on the page and then change its text content or any nonsense like that. All we do is manage that array, our state. And then React does the work of keeping that in sync with the DOM. We just put this one simple little thing inside the UL. We can even write it as JSX. And anytime that array changes, a new li gets added or removed. If we remove one from the array, it gets removed from here. We don't have to worry about doing both things every time we change anything, as we did before. When we removed before, we not only had to take it out of the array, we also had to remove it from the DOM. We had to find it and remove it. No more. Manage that piece of state, and the page just updates. So that's why we did that whole thing with the array, so we could go through the pain of managing both parts. And it was necessary to keep the data because we wanted to store it in local storage, right? We wanted to sync it with something. But the whole part where we updated the page based on that data was completely manual. React takes care of it for us. So we could make this arrow function a named function too, if we wanted. So above render, because again, render will be the last method, we could say render acrobat and receive the acrobat as an argument and just have it return that same thing. And then inside map, all I have to do is this dot render acrobat. One second. Before I do that, as mentioned before, if this only takes one argument, we don't need the parentheses. If it's a one-line function, we don't need the curly braces. We can just put it right up there. What I didn't mention a minute ago is that if that one line is also the return value, you don't even need the explicit return. A one-line arrow function will automatically return what you put there. So that's how short that could be. But we do want to move it out to a named function for illustration purposes, if nothing else. This dot render acrobat. Not an arrow function now. We need an explicit return. So anytime the state changes via set state, any piece of the DOM that depends on that data, anything that's bound to it, will automatically update. So if the array updates, that kind of seems like this entire UL, every single LI, would have to be updated, would have to be refreshed. There's one more thing we can do to make sure that it only changes the LIs that it actually needs to. And if we were running this outside of CodePen, we would actually get a warning from React about this problem. And that is, we could give it a way to identify each LI uniquely by sticking a prop on it called key. So map, the callback that you pass into map, will receive each item of the array as the first argument. The second argument will be the index, the current index of the array. So let's go ahead and pass that in. Now it's going to pass it in whether we give it a name or not. It doesn't enforce the number of arguments. But if we include it in our list here, I, then we can use it. And even if you have the same acrobat twice in the list, I is going to be different for every single one, right? So we could use that as our unique identifier. So all we do is on the LI, we give it a prop of key. And we set that to I. And now, if just that one index in the array changes, it will only change this one LI, which keeps it very fast. Notice the curly braces. So these look like attributes. They're props, which are effectively arguments. It's how we pass data from one component to another. When you need to manage some data internally in a component, you use state. When you need to pass data from one component to another, we use props. We'll get lots and lots of practice doing that, but that's one concept that you absolutely must get down, or you'll be confused very, very quickly. So we'll see more examples from Seth here in just a second. Any questions about that stuff? If we wanted to make it pretty, it's also pretty easy to add foundation in CodePen.